As much as I like doing questions for atheist videos, I have to admit that most of them are just monotonously dumb, just repeating the same old tired claims over and over and over again, all of which have been repeatedly debunked because they just don't care. These people, I don't know if they think they came up with it on their own or what, but clearly they didn't. That's why I have said that there's got to be a master list out there on a website that these people are all picking questions from. There just is this absurd amount of repetition. So is this going to be any better? I don't know. Let's go check it out. We're back once again with Faith Evolved and his so-called 10 honest questions for atheists. I don't think I'd call any of them honest so far, although we've only seen the one, so who the hell knows? It's more like ignorant, but I guess what else can we expect? So to explain the rules of this experiment, I'm going to watch a question, and if it's one of these standard, already entirely debunked nonsense questions that the theists bring up over and over again, I'm going to give a perfunctory answer and then just go ahead and fast forward through it. So far, I haven't had to do that. Although, as I said, we've only had one question so far, so that's not really much of a pool. Will we have to do it this time? I don't know. Let's go look and see.
All right, so question number 2. How can intelligence come from non-intelligence?
Consciousness is an emergent property of the physical brain. That's all there is to it. This is really where we start to see the theist ego get into the mix, and that is not at all impressive. It's all ego and fifis, and that's kind of pathetic. You have to learn to deal with things as they actually are, not as you desperately wish they were, and the religious, they seem to have a huge problem with that, don't they? Granted, they're not the only ones, but the second that your ego and wishful thinking get involved, you've pretty much lost. Now, I'm going to give him a little more time to clarify his question, but let's be honest, we already know where this is going. It's a combination of, it seems to me, and, but I want to be special. And those are never a good sign, are they? So let's wait and see what else he's got.
So, in other words, I always use this example because I've been using it since Windows 95, but I used to tell my atheist friends, like, hey, here's this Windows 95 CD. By the way, it just came out of nowhere.
Which just means you're a bigger idiot than we thought. And I just have to throw this in here because it comes up a lot, but pretty much all of these so-called honest questions for atheists, they're not honest. Honestly dumb, I guess, but they are not asked in good faith. There's always a gotcha aimed at the already religious so that they can feel smugly superior to people who haven't even answered the question in the first place. That's why he's got 76 downvotes compared to 26 upvotes, and for the vast majority of atheist comments, he only responds to a very few, and then only to say, I don't understand, as if that actually means anything. Yes, we know that you're an ignorant fuck, but that's not an excuse to just believe things because they're comforting. This is a very, very, very common tactic among the religious, and we point out how wrong it is every single time it shows up. Not that they care or anything, they just really want to believe.
No one programmed it. You know, it's just one day I looked down on my desk and I saw a Windows 95 CD, put it in my CD-ROM, was able to install Windows and use Windows. I got the start button here. I got, these windows. I can play these games. I can do Excel. I can do, my Word documents. Everything's there. It just, it may have taken millions of years, but somehow all the molecules and all the atoms and, the data just somehow materialized, to this point where I can actually use it.
So, tell us you're a complete moron without telling us you're a complete moron. Seriously, have you even tried to do any independent research? No? Obviously. Because that's how most people operate. If you can't run it through the existing filters and come up with an answer that you like, well, it's just got to be wrong, right? That's not how this works. A, your filters could be wrong, and that's the one thing that the religious refuse to entertain. B, your comfort has nothing at all to do with reality. Nobody says the real world has to make you happy. It is whatever it is, and your feelings mean absolutely nothing. Yet they can't handle that, can they? Because they're not concerned with actual facts. They're only after the stuff that makes them tingle inside, and that is positively childish. So, your epistemology is complete crap. You are being ridiculously emotional, and you think that what you already believe, well, it just can't possibly be wrong because you really like the idea. This is why the religious fail so often when it comes to actual discussions with atheists. Because they're idiots and proud of it. And that is not a good thing.
And if I was to ask anybody, they would say, yeah, it took intelligence to create that.
The Windows CD? Sure, because we know that's true. To create intelligence and consciousness, though? Nope, that's just a product of the evolution of the physical brain. It doesn't matter what you like, it doesn't matter if you understand it, it's still true. Because let's look at the evidence in front of us. You've got this guy in a tiny bedroom with crap all over the floor. That kind of screams to me that he still lives with his parents. Now, that may or may not be true. I have no way of knowing, but anyone financially successful and living on their own is probably not going to be living in a tiny bedroom because it's very obvious that's what it is. They're going to at least have the master bedroom, even in an apartment, and hopefully it's going to be bigger than that. Plus, and this is just something that bugs me, but I've seen tons of videos where the background is a complete disaster. Do you not know how to clean? Pick the boxes up and, at the very least, get them out of the frame. Better yet, how about you try throwing them away? Make your bed. It's not that hard. This just makes him look like a religious incel, which I am not going to comment further on. Make an effort, that's all I'm saying.
Clearly, Bill Gates, see his name right there, Bill Gates. He started Microsoft. He's the one that worked with, his team of, software engineers to come up with Windows 95 and all the subsequent versions after that.
No, because Bill Gates retired, at least for the most part, in 2008, and he actually retired from the larger company board in 2020. It's kind of weird how you don't know that, given that this video was made in 2023. Now, that has nothing at all to do with the content of the video, but you'd think he'd come up with a better example, because this one falls apart under even the most cursory of scrutiny. It's a massive category error. But what would the religious do if they couldn't fall for every logical fallacy under the sun? They might actually have to make some sense, and they sure can't have that, can they?
Like, no one would debunk me on that or try to tell you that's unscientific. Just because you see a CD right here doesn't mean it's proof that someone created it. How do you know it didn't evolve over billions of years?
Because CDs don't evolve? Biological life forms do? CDs don't reproduce? Biological life forms do? This is where these people are just so damn stupid, and it shows. It's really hard to understand how they can be that ignorant. Granted, some of that is, and I have no idea in this particular case, but a lot of religious morons were homeschooled by people who had no clue what education was. Honestly, we need to put a stop to that. I'm fine with homeschooling if you really want to, but your kids need to be independently tested to make sure that they are getting the proper education that they deserve and learning the objective facts that they need to actually be learning. Granted, we hardly get that in most public schools these days, and that's pretty pathetic too. But you can't just say, well, I feel like my kid is learning what I want them to learn, because that should never, ever, ever fly. Outside testing should be required, and if you fail the tests, then you don't get to be homeschooled anymore. There need to be standards, and right now, there really are none.
So I would kind of extrapolate that to, why couldn't, because we do have clear evidence that there's some design within the human body. I mean, look at the DNA code, for example.
You're an idiot. There is no DNA code. It's just chemistry doing what chemistry does. There is no apparent design. Life is a series of positive mutations producing more offspring and negative mutations producing less offspring for millions and millions of years. It doesn't matter what you want to be true. It doesn't matter what you understand. I mean, you should understand it, but these people tend to be really dumb and uneducated, and that's why they can't get it through their heads. I'm trying not to assume anything about his background, but come on, when you're this ignorant on screen, it's kind of hard not to. I really don't think that this guy came out of Harvard with a string of PhDs, do you? Now, granted, I didn't either. I didn't go to Harvard, although I do have multiple advanced degrees, and something about this guy doesn't strike me that way. I could be wrong, and I'll freely admit I'm wrong if he wants to put up the evidence. He just doesn't strike me as being all that bright or all that educated, although I don't necessarily know that for sure. I can only tell you what I'm seeing for myself.
They even call it code. I mean, why is that not some kind of proof? I'm not saying it's proof of a god per se, but definitely proof of a higher power. Someone, programming this universe, this matrix, whatever you want to call it.
This is where interpretation becomes complete insanity. He's just reading into things that which he happens to really like because he really wishes that was true. This is the product of religious delusion. This is what happens when you've been brainwashed and you don't actually care about the real facts. This is so common with the religious and why they rely on, it seems to me, theology, but that's really what they do. But hey, so long as it sounds good to them, it's got to be true, right? Because they have no mechanism whatsoever for actually putting their beliefs to the test, and they don't want one either. They just really like the idea that it's true, and that's good enough for them. It's not good enough, though, for anyone else, or at least it shouldn't be. You should not only be willing to put everything you believe to the rational test, you should insist on it. It sounds good to me should never be enough, and if it is, you are doing intelligence wrong. And sadly, that seems to be what most theists are doing, right?
So question number 3. If anything exists at all, wouldn't it have to have existed in some state or form for all eternity?
We don't know. That's something that you should get used to, but the religious, they refuse to do that, right? Because they are uncomfortable admitting to ignorance, so they just make up a bunch of emotionally comforting nonsense that isn't supported by anything whatsoever but their own immature wishes and dreams. These are people who have clearly never grown up and learned to deal with reality as it is. And that's really what you need to do. Stop pretending that you automatically know all of the answers and start saying that you're ignorant of a great many things. Because you are. And for the religious, maybe way more than average, at least for a lot of these people. Because when you start to invent explanations in your head that you've got no demonstrable bearing in fact, you tend to stop looking for any actual answers because you think you've already got some. And that's why these people tend to be so dumb. They know nothing, and they're too stupid to know that they know nothing. And that's pathetic, isn't it?
And this kind of goes back to the Windows 95 example. It's not only that you have to have the Windows 95 CD, with the intelligence behind it to create it, there also has to be a system in place for it to run on.
Hey, when you're that dumb, double down on it so it removes any doubt. This was a bad example in the first place, and he's incapable of renting a clue. Now, I admit, I see this kind of thinking, in some massive air quotes, from a lot of people, not just the religious. And trying to correct their misconceptions does absolutely nothing Because they just don't care. They are emotionally invested in believing their ridiculous bullshit, and I find it especially laughable when I see atheists doing it, who can see the failures in the religious irrationality, but they cannot remotely see it in their own. In fact, I've had a sporadic series of posts over on the blog where I point out where atheists criticize something that somebody else is doing, and then they just turn around and do the exact same thing themselves and be completely blinded to it. Now that's just sad, but that's still what's going on.
It has to be an operating system, for example. And the operating system of the universe, at least in part, is like physics and mathematics, just to name a couple.
And clearly, you don't understand any of it. This is usually where this kind of stuff goes sideways because the religious don't know what the hell they're talking about. They just envision it in their head that it's all operating manual and rules and requirements and all that kind of crap written by their imaginary friend. And it's not. It just isn't. These people tend to be very scientifically ignorant and hold these positions on faith, and that's kind of a problem. Faith doesn't get you anywhere. Faith is not a virtue. Faith makes you look like a moron. Asserting your conclusion with no evidence whatsoever doesn't make your assertion true. And this is one of the reasons, among many, that these people fail. It goes right back to, it seems to me, based on absolutely no demonstrable expertise in anything. It has no evidence of any kind. They just really like the idea. They just really want it to be true. And that means nothing.
I mean, it has to be, time and space. Like, everything has to exist. I mean, you can't just have a CD-ROM without a computer with a processor and RAM and a hard drive to store and process all that data.
You are just dumb. Sorry, there just is no other way to put it. But these people tend to think of things in terms that they already sort of understand, although I don't think that this guy would understand the inner workings of a computer if his life depended on it. Not that he necessarily has to or anything, but they tend to have very vague ideas that they then impose on other vague ideas, and somehow they think that they're geniuses when definitely they're not. Because they don't actually understand how to think. They don't know how to reason. That's the problem, and they're just not concerned about their failures because everyone around them is doing the exact same kind of thing. They are surrounded by ignorance and people telling them that ignorance is a good thing so long as they listen and believe, and they just can't take that essential step back and realize where they're going wrong. Because they don't care. And that's why they fail.
So in my mind, I think, wouldn't it be easier for there to be nothing at all?
That's probably all that's up there. You don't understand the concepts that you're throwing around. There is no nothing. There can be no nothing. Nothing is not even a coherent concept. Because if there ever was a nothing, and we have no evidence that anything like that has ever existed, then that would be unstable. And all of a sudden, you'd have quantum particles popping into existence in the midst of the nothing, making it not nothing. But then again, the religious tend to think in very simplistic terms, don't they? They have no clue about regular physics, much less quantum physics. They don't know how reality works, which is why they've just made up these simplistic explanations in their heads, because it's a whole lot easier than finding out the truth. Or admitting that they just don't know, right? They just want to know. But their claims of knowledge are laughably false. And that's not a good thing, but then again, that is the religious mindset, isn't it?
Then if even there'd be one atom, but if this one atom, it might not have been an atom for all eternity, but there had to be some kind of information to transform that from whatever it was before, some kind of pre-energy state, to an atom that it is now.
And you're wrong. Take a glass of water, put it in the freezer, it becomes ice. It has transformed from one state to another. What intelligence had to be involved for that to happen? And before you say that somebody had to put it into the freezer, it could have been a puddle outside in the winter. I'm just trying to make this easier to conceptualize. There's no intelligence required for any of this. There's no information being exchanged. It's just physics doing what physics does. There's no purpose. There's no meaning. It's just how reality works. And while he might admit to that, when it comes to bigger concepts, he'll reject it entirely because he feels the need to just shoehorn his imaginary friend in there somehow. Because that's what he's been brainwashed to do. But that doesn't make it true, does it?
And maybe it'll go to another state at some point in the future, but again, there has to be some kind of system in place for that atom to exist within, some kind of construct. It's just not going to be nothing at all whatsoever, and then poof, at least one item.
He's so ignorant that he's not even cognizant enough to know how ignorant he is. This is where religion goes completely wrong, and to be fair, where a lot of people go wrong, because people don't like not knowing, but a lot of them are just too lazy to find out. Hey, I don't understand, so here's my explanation so I just don't feel so bad. Yeah, but how did you come up with that? Someone told me it was true. Did you bother to verify it in any realistic evidence-based way? No. Or the ever popular, it sounds good to me. That's so dumb. I don't even know how to express how dumb it is. Yet tons of people do it, right? Not just the religious, but for a lot of things. The tide comes in, the tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. Complete moroning moronically. I mean, who is that dumb? Tons of people. But that's not something to be proud of, is it?
One atom. There has to be something for that to exist within. So that's why I say whatever exists had to have always existed at some state.
It's possible. We just don't know. We have no means whatsoever to explore prior to Planck time. We have no clue, and we probably never will. That doesn't grant you a license to just make shit up, and that goes for everyone. We can say, hey, here's my hypothesis, and that's all fine and everything, but you gotta go beyond a hypothesis. You need to actually find evidence that your hypothesis is true. There are all kinds of cosmological models addressing what might have happened before the Big Bang, but we can't actually verify any of them. That's just the reality of it. That's where you move from actuality to hypothetically, and it doesn't really matter until you can find a way to do it with any kind of verifiable evidence, any kind of verifiable research. It's just going to remain a concept in your head. You know, like a god. But that doesn't make it real, and we need to learn to accept that.
And that leads to my fourth question.
And we're going to stop here for the day. We'll come back to his fourth question next time, because I've got no idea how long it might be, although he is halfway through his video, and only 3 questions out of 10 so far, so these are going to have to be pretty rapid fire moving forward. But we're stopping for the day anyhow. Hopefully, moving forward, we'll be able to get through at least maybe 3 to 4 per video, assuming that they're worth doing at all, which so far I'm actually kind of surprised that I haven't had to fast forward through anything. At least he hasn't thrown the kalam at us, which if he does, we're almost certainly just going to skip through it. Maybe next time it'll all just be the standard bullshit religious claims that we've all seen a million times before, and we'll have a quick video and just be done with it. I don't know. So anyhow, what do you think? Were either of these questions worthwhile? They really look like someone riding around on their own ignorance pony and pretending to be a cowboy. And I see that a lot. Here's where you're going wrong. Nuh-uh. That's kind of how most theists handle themselves, and it doesn't get them anywhere intelligent. You need to be able to back this stuff up with more than, I've got faith, and my book says a thing. And none of them can do it, can they? And that's really sad from where I'm sitting. How about you? Anyhow, we'll be back next week for the unspecified number of questions that we can fit in. and we'll have to just see how it goes. So far, so good. I mean, bad questions, but I think this is a pretty decent format. How about you?